The wind was coming down the corridor when the black sedan turned onto the gravel lane. I was standing barefoot on the porch, and the county emergency siren had cycled through twice in the last hour. The Derecho was 40 minutes out. Through the kitchen window, I could see my step-uncle boarding the storm shutters over the glass. My mother handed him the plywood strips. Neither of them looked toward the yard. The car stopped at the end of the drive. The rear door opened. The woman who stepped out was 71 years old and worth more money than the whole township put together. She looked at me. She looked at the farmhouse. She said one word: "Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories." If you're new here, we share stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet moments that change everything. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let us get into it. The first Sunday, Vance moved into our house. The sky was so clear it looked painted. I was 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea, while my mother scrambled eggs on the cast iron stove and hummed something I did not recognize. My father had been dead for 14 months. The house still smelled like him in the mornings, when the hallway held the warmth from the night, and the wood floors released whatever they had been keeping. Sawdust, diesel, the faint sweetness of the pipe tobacco he bought in bulk at the feed store because it was $3 cheaper than the hardware brand. Vance pulled into the driveway in a white pickup truck with a toolbox bolted to the bed. He carried a box of wrenches and a post-hole digger through the front door without knocking. My mother smiled at him. It was the first time she had smiled in a way that reached her eyes since the funeral. And I remember thinking I should be happy about that. I remember thinking that was the correct feeling. He said he was going to fix the north windbreak. The windbreak leaned a little to the west, where my father had been meaning to reset the posts before the ground froze, and he never got to it. Vance measured everything twice. He dug out the old posts, poured concrete into the holes, waited for it to set, and bolted the new rails. He worked all afternoon. My mother brought him lemonade in a glass with ice. I sat on the porch and watched because nobody told me not to, and nobody told me to come inside, and nobody asked me what I thought. By 4 o'clock, the windbreak was done. Vance stood back and looked at it the way men look at things they have fixed, like they have personally won a fight with the weather. Then he opened a can of paint and started rolling it on. Gray. The fence had been red. My father chose the color when I was 4, the year he bought the acreage. He called it field red because he said every stretch of road in our county needed one thing that was different from the rest. I did not say anything as Vance painted over it. I finished my tea and went inside and washed my glass and put it in the drying rack. That was the first Sunday. There would be 832 more. Vance did not yell. That was the thing people never understood when I tried to explain it later. He did not raise his voice. He did not throw things. He did not hit. What Vance did was quieter than all of that, and it worked better. He rearranged the house one room at a time. The photographs of my father came down from the hallway within the first month. Not all at once. One frame disappeared on a Tuesday, another on a Thursday. By December, the only picture of my dad left in the house was a wallet-sized photo I kept in the back of my sock drawer, pressed between 2 pieces of cardboard from a seed catalog. Vance changed the farm landline and told my mother it was because of telemarketers. My grandmother called the old number for 3 weeks before she realized it had been disconnected. By then, Vance had told me she did not want to talk to me anymore. He said it plainly, the way you say the well pump needs priming. Your grandma is busy with her own holdings, Alina. Do not take it personal. He opened the mail before anyone else touched it. Every envelope that came through the slot went through Vance's hands first. He sorted it at the kitchen counter with a butter knife, slicing each one open, reading the contents, then leaving the ones he decided were appropriate in a small stack by the phone. I did not know then what he was looking for. I would not understand that for 16 more years. He decided which neighbors we spoke to, which equipment we bought, what time the gates stayed locked. My mother stood beside every decision like a woman holding an umbrella for someone else in the rain. When I asked her why, she said the same thing every time. Vance just wants what is best for this operation. I learned not to argue. Arguing cost energy I did not have and changed nothing I could measure. Instead, I saved. I kept my father's brass grain auger key in the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, wrapped in a cotton handkerchief my grandmother had embroidered with my initials when I was born. I kept it polished. The key had a worn head and a ring that clicked when you turned it, and it was the only thing in that house that still belonged to me without Vance's permission. I kept it wound every morning. I never forgot. My father built things. That was the simplest true sentence I knew about him. Arthur Palmer was an agronomist by license and a farmer by blood. And the year I turned 4, he bought the acreage on County Road 4 with money he had been saving since he was 19. My grandmother told me that once years later, she said he walked her through the front door and pointed at the ceiling where the plaster was peeling and the light fixture was hanging by one wire and said, "I can fix everything in here." And he did. He built the south barn himself. It took him 3 weekends and a Monday he called in sick for, and when it was done, he carried me down the hallway on his shoulders and opened the door and said, "This one is yours, Ellie." The room had a window that looked out over the creek, and in the mornings the sun came in at a low angle that turned the walls gold. He had sanded the floor by hand because the rental sander left marks he did not like. After Vance moved in, that room became storage. My things went into the smaller room across the hall, and Vance filled the south barn with tool boxes and feed sacks and a portable table so he never once plugged in. The window that faced the creek stayed closed. The sun still came in, but it lit up cardboard boxes instead of a bed. My grandmother used to visit every Sunday. She brought pecan pie from the bakery on Route 9 and sat on the front porch and told me stories about her business. She had started with a small parcel in 1979 and turned it into something else, and then something else after that. She taught me how to read a yield report, how to check the bushels on a delivery ticket, how to check that the numbers on a co-op contract match the numbers someone told you out loud. "People lie with their mouths," she said once. "They almost never lie with a certified scale." One Sunday she did not come. I was 14. My mother said she was busy. The next Sunday, busy again. The Sunday after that, I stopped asking. I did not see my grandmother again for 14 years. Not until the night the wind came, and a black sedan turned onto our lane, and a woman who had been waiting since I was a child stepped out into the dust and said one word about the land my father bought. I found the FSA and co-op statements on a Wednesday afternoon in March, 4 months before the Derecho. I had come home early from the extension lab because the moisture analyzer was down, and my supervisor sent the text home at 2. Vance was at the equipment dealer across town. My mother was at the feed store. The house was quiet in the way it only ever was when Vance was not in it, which was a specific kind of quiet that had space in it. I went into the south barn, the storage room, because I needed my old certification folder. The community college had asked for a copy of my original transcripts, and I was almost certain I had filed them in the plastic bin my mother gave me when I turned 18. The bin was under a stack of Vance's boxes, so I moved them one at a time. And the third box, a shoe box with no lid, was full of envelopes. They were from a crop insurance and co-op dividend fund. My father's name was on every one. I sat down on the concrete floor between the spare parts and read them. The policy had been set up when I was 2 years old, a term payout that converted to a permanent fund after my father died. The beneficiary was listed as me, Alina Palmer, to be accessed at age 25. I was 28. I had never been contacted. I had never signed anything. The statements told the rest. Withdrawals had been made starting when I was 23, 2 years before I was supposed to receive the funds. The total was $91,200. The authorized signer was Vance Corley, under a power of attorney document executed by Clara Palmer Corley. My mother had signed over my father's co-op dividends and crop insurance payouts to my step-uncle. I read the statement twice, then a third time. My hands shook, but not from the cold. It was not the money. $91,000 was a tremendous amount of money to me. But the shaking was not about that. It was about the signatures. It was about my mother's handwriting on a legal form that gave Vance permission to take what my father had left for me, and the fact that in all the years since, neither of them had said a word. I folded the statements and put them in my jacket pocket. I put the shoe box back under the other boxes. I replaced the bins. I closed the door. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich and ate it standing up. I did not say anything to anyone that night. I waited. The storm system was named the June Corridor. She had been a severe wind warning when she crossed the state line. And by the time she turned east toward the county, she was a derecho with 90-mile-per-hour gusts. The Weather Service issued a mandatory shelter warning for the rural routes and a voluntary evacuation for our part of the county, which meant that people with somewhere to go were already gone, and people without somewhere to go were boarding their windows and hoping. Vance did not want to leave. He said the farmhouse had survived every storm since it was built, which was true because my father had built it to code and then some. Vance said evacuating was for people who panicked, and he was not a man who panicked. What he did not say, and what I understood by then was that Vance did not want to leave, because the acreage was the only thing that made him feel like he was in charge of something. His equipment leasing deal had closed 8 years ago. His truck was financed. His name was not on the deed because there was no mortgage, just a trust he did not know about. The land was all Vance had, and he held onto it the way a man holds onto a steering wheel in a skid. We sat down for dinner at 6:15. Meatloaf, canned corn, and iced tea. The weather radio was on behind us, the projections cycling through warnings in red and orange. My mother ate quickly. Vance ate slowly. I set my fork down. Vance, I said, I found the FSA and co-op statements. $91,200. Where did it go? He stopped chewing. 3 seconds passed. He set his fork on the edge of his plate and the tines made a small bright sound against the ceramic. That money went to this land, he said. To the irrigation, the seed, the diesel, keeping you warm, keeping you fed. You owe this operation, Alina. It was my father's payout, I said, for me. Vance pushed his chair back. My mother stood up at the same moment like she had been waiting for a signal. Vance pointed at the front door. Get out, he said. When you remember your place, you can come back in. I looked at my mother. She looked at the linoleum. I walked to the front door. I stepped outside. Behind me, I heard the deadbolt turn. Then the chain. Then the sound of my mother's boots walking back to the kitchen. The wind was warm. Then it was not. I stood on the porch for 11 minutes before I started walking. I know it was 11 minutes because I counted. Counting was something I did when things got bad. In the lab, when a sample came back wrong, and the supervisor on the other end of the phone was angry, and the numbers were not what anyone wanted, I counted seconds until I could speak without my voice breaking. 11 minutes. The wind was picking up. The rain had gone from steady to driving, the kind that comes at you from the side and hits your skin like gravel. I walked to the edge of the driveway and looked up and down the road. Porch lights were on in some houses. Others were dark, boarded up, gone. Mrs. Gable's house across the road had a single lamp in the kitchen window, and I could see the shape of her standing behind the curtain. I did not have shoes on. My phone was in my back pocket. I did not have a single number to call. My mother was inside. Vance was inside. My coworkers were acquaintances. Not the kind of people you call when you are standing in the wind during a derecho with no shoes and no plan. I had been building toward moving out for 8 months. Deposit money in a savings account Vance did not know about. A 1-bedroom I had toured twice, but I was not there yet. I was 4 months away from free, and Vance had just moved the deadline up by locking the door. Then the headlights turned onto County Road 4. The car was long and black and moved slowly, the way expensive things move. It stopped at the end of the driveway. The engine did not cut off. The rear passenger door opened from the inside, and a woman stepped out into the dust like the dust was someone else's problem. She was 71 years old. She wore a long raincoat buttoned to the collar and flat shoes that looked like they had been chosen for exactly this kind of ground. Her hair was silver and pinned up, and the wind hit her face, and she did not blink. She looked at me standing barefoot on the gravel. She looked at the house, at the windows where the plywood caught the light, at the sealed front door, at the driveway where no one had come out to check on me. She said, dissolve. The driver came around with an umbrella. He held it over me, not over her. She waved me toward the car. I got in. She got in after me. The door closed. Inside the car, it was warm and smelled like leather and something clean, like cedar in a closed room. My grandmother reached into the pocket of her raincoat and pulled out a handkerchief and handed it to me without a word. I pressed it to my face. It smelled like pecan pie. In the other pocket, I saw the corner of a yellow envelope. I did not ask about it. I have waited 14 years, she said quietly, to be allowed to come near you. The hotel was 15 minutes from our lane, but it felt like it was in another country. Helen had booked a suite on the 7th floor 2 days before the storm hit, which I learned later was the exact day the National Weather Service upgraded the corridor to a severe derecho. My grandmother did not guess about weather. She read the same data everyone else read. She just believed it sooner. The room had 2 beds, a sitting area, and a view of the flat horizon that was now a wall of black sky and driving rain. The building was concrete and steel, built in the 90s by a developer my grandmother had competed against and eventually outlasted. She told me that while I was standing in the bathroom doorway toweling off my hair. Henderson built this hotel in 1994. She said steel core, wind-rated glass. He knew what he was doing with structures. He just did not know what he was doing with margins. There were dry clothes on the bed my size, a pair of jeans, a gray pullover, Thick socks, slip-on shoes from a brand I recognized but had never been able to afford. She had packed them before she came. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dry clothes and held a cup of tea she had made from a kettle on the counter. The wind outside sounded like a freight train running on a track that was not quite level. The windows flexed but held. "How did you know I was outside?" I asked. "Gable called me." She said. "Gable Payne. She lives across the road from you. She was a friend of your father's. She has been a friend of mine for longer than that. You kept in touch with her." I kept in touch with everyone on that stretch who would talk to me. "Vance changed your phone number 3 times. He returned every letter I sent through my attorney. He told you I did not want to see you. Gable told me you believed him." I set the tea down. "I did believe him, I know. For 14 years, I know that too." She folded her hands in her lap. Outside, the Derecho was making landfall. The lights flickered once and held. My grandmother sat in the chair across from me like she was waiting for something she had been waiting for a very long time. "There is something else you need to know about this acreage," she said. "My father bought the land in 1998, the year I was born. He paid for it with money my grandmother had loaned him, not given him. My grandmother did not give money. She loaned it with terms, and she kept records, and the records were filed with an attorney in a town 40 minutes from ours, because she did not trust anyone local not to talk. The land was placed in a trust, the Palmer Family Trust, established by Helen Palmer in 1997, 1 year before Arthur used the funds to purchase the acreage. The trust held the title. My father was the beneficiary during his lifetime. If he died, the beneficiary became me. Clara was given a life estate. My grandmother explained, her voice as even as a line drawn with a ruler. She could live on the property. She could not sell it, she could not transfer it, she could not borrow against it. These were the terms. Did she know? She signed the agreement before the wedding. Whether she read it is not something I can answer. And Vance has never seen the document. Vance believes Clara owns the land because Clara told him she owns the land. And Vance has never been the kind of man who checks county records he does not like. I sat in silence for a full minute. Outside, the wind screamed against the building like something alive and furious. Lightning split the sky, and for 1 second the whole room was bright white and shadowless. "When you said dissolve," I said slowly. "What did you mean?" My grandmother leaned forward. Her hands were still folded. "I meant I will take back what belongs to this family. The acreage is trust property. Vance has no legal claim. Clara's life estate is conditional on not causing harm to the beneficiary. She locked you outside during a 90-mile-per-hour wind event. The condition has been violated." She paused. "And if they refuse to vacate, I will have the structures stripped and the land returned to its original survey. I have dissolved and rebuilt holdings my entire life, Alina. It is what I do." She said it the way she said everything, like the words had been measured before they were spoken, and she had decided they were exactly the right weight. "I will not ask your permission," she added, "but I would like your participation." I picked up the tea. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. "Yes," I said. "I need to pause here for a second. If you have ever sat across from someone who told you the truth that no one else would say, the kind of truth that rearranges the furniture in your head, then you know what that silence feels like. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment. Tell me, and if you have not already, please subscribe. We are just getting started. The storm passed by 3 in the morning. I know because I was awake. My grandmother slept in the other bed with her raincoat folded over the back of the chair, and her flat shoes lined up by the door, and she did not stir once through the worst of it. I asked her the next morning how she slept through a severe derecho. She said she had slept through worse in 1989 when a bank tried to foreclose on her second property, and she spent the night before the hearing at a motel near the courthouse going over documents. "Weather is temporary," she said. "Paperwork is permanent." In the morning, the county looked like it had been emptied out and put back wrong. Trees were down across the roads. A grain trailer from the highway had ended up in a ditch 2 miles south. Power lines sagged between their poles like wet laundry, but the hotel stood. And down the road, when we drove past in the sedan with the driver steering carefully around debris, our stretch stood too. Roofs missing shingles, yards full of branches, but the houses were upright. My father's farmhouse was upright. He had built it to survive exactly this. My grandmother had a lawyer waiting for us at the hotel that afternoon. Mr. Hayes was a man in his early 60s with a gray suit and the particular calmness that comes from having read a lot of land contracts and found the same mistakes in most of them. He set a briefcase on the table and opened it, and inside were 3 folders. "The first is the trust documentation," he said. Title, deed, terms of the life estate. The second is the co-op and FSA records and withdrawal statements. He paused, and the third? He looked at my grandmother. She nodded. The third is a commercial loan application filed with a regional ag lender 18 months ago. The applicant is Vance Corley. The collateral listed is the acreage at County Road 4. The loan amount was $42,000. The co-signer is listed as Clara Palmer Corley. I stared at the folder. Vance borrowed money against land he does not own. Hayes said the application contains a property affidavit signed by Vance Corley stating that he is the rightful owner. That statement is false. The signature of the co-signer does not match Clara's authenticated handwriting on file with the trust. My grandmother folded her hands. Hayes closed the briefcase. We have options, he said. Vance called me 6 days after the storm. The power had been restored to most of the neighborhood by then, and people were hauling wet carpet to the curb and stacking branches by the road for the county trucks to collect. I was sitting in the apartment my grandmother had rented for me, a one-bedroom on the third floor of a building near the hospital where I worked, when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized but had not seen in years. Vance's cell. Aliner, his voice was controlled the way it always was. Level measured like he was reading from a script he had written in his head. I got a letter from a lawyer. I want to know what game you are playing. I did not answer. He waited 3 seconds and kept going. This is about the FSA payouts. I get it. You are upset. But that money kept the operation running. It kept the diesel in the tank for you. It kept seed in the ground for 16 years. If you want to call that stealing, go ahead. But you lived on that land for free, and you owe more than you think. I listened. I could hear the weather radio in the background. I heard my mother say something I could not make out. Come home, Vance said. We will work this out like a family. I hung up. 3 days later, a post appeared on the county Facebook group for our township. Vance had written it. He described how Aliner, his niece, had left the farmhouse voluntarily during the storm, despite their efforts to keep her safe. He described how his mother-in-law, a wealthy land developer, was now attempting to evict a working family from their homestead in the aftermath of a natural disaster. He used the phrase predatory behavior. He used the phrase taking advantage of a tragedy. 47 people reacted to the post. Most of them were sympathetic. The next morning my mother called. Her voice was thin and high. The voice she used when she needed something to stop. Aliner, honey, Vance says he is sorry. Come home. Please do not make this a big thing. My mother said, do not make this a big thing about being locked outside during a Derecho. She said it the same way she said, pass the salt. Like it cost her nothing, like I should have already moved on. I said, I cannot do that, Mom. She said, you are going to ruin this family. I said, I know. Hayes's office was on the second floor of a converted bank building, with tall windows that let in the kind of light that made everything look more serious than it already was. He sat behind a desk with the 3 folders in front of him, arranged left to right. Trust, FSA records, loan. Walk me through the third folder, I said. He opened it and turned it so I could read. The loan application was dated 18 months prior. Vance had applied for $42,000 from a regional lender, listing the county road 4 acreage as collateral. The application included a property affidavit in which Vance declared himself the rightful owner of the property. Below his signature was a line for the co-signer, Clara Palmer Corley. The handwriting on that line was not my mother's. How do you know it is not hers? I asked. Hayes placed a second document beside it, a notarized signature card from the Palmer Family Trust dated 2002, the year after my father died. My mother had signed it to acknowledge the terms of her life estate. The 2 signatures looked like they had been written by different people. My mother's authentic signature had a particular loop on the C and a forward lean on the P. The one on the loan application was flat and careful. The kind of handwriting that comes from someone trying to copy something they have seen but have not practiced. Either your mother signed it under duress and altered her own handwriting, Hayes said, or someone signed it for her. I sat back in the chair. The sunlight came through the wooden blinds and laid stripes across the desk. I could see the dust in the air. I could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. It sounded like my father's pocket watch. What does this mean for Vance? I asked. Legally, he filed a false property affidavit. He used an asset he does not own as collateral for a personal loan, and the cosigner's signature may be forged. Each of those is a separate offense. And the options. Option 1, we proceed with the trust violation and the eviction notice and we leave the loan matter alone. Option 2, we proceed with the trust violation, the eviction notice, and we refer the loan documentation to the district attorney for criminal review. I held the paper in my hand, Vance's signature, my mother's name written in handwriting that was not hers. For 16 years, Vance had been the one who decided what happened on that acreage. Now I was the one who decided what happened to him. I did not decide that day. Hayes told me to take the weekend, and I did. I went back to the apartment and sat on the bed with a folder on my lap and the window open to the sound of the county, putting itself back together after the storm, chainsaws and generators, and the beeping of utility trucks backing up, the ordinary machinery of people fixing what had been broken. I read the documents again, then I read them again, not because I did not understand them, but because each time I read them, the picture changed shape. The first time it was about money. The second time it was about Vance. The third time it was about my mother's signature on a power of attorney that gave Vance access to my father's co-op fund, and the way her handwriting on the loan application did not match, and what that meant about who my mother was, and what she had allowed to happen in that house. On Saturday night, I called my grandmother. I want the land back, I said. I want the FSA and co-op money returned, and I want Vance to know exactly why. And Clara. My voice broke for the first time since the night of the storm. I had held it together through the Sedan and the hotel, and the lawyer's office and the phone calls. And it broke now in the quiet of a rented apartment, while the air conditioning hummed in the wall, and a stack of legal papers sat on the nightstand, like a prescription I had not yet filled. Mom chose, I said. She chose a long time ago. I cannot choose for her. No, my grandmother said softly. You cannot. I told Hayes on Monday morning. I did not want to file criminal charges. Prosecuting Vance would drag my mother into a courtroom. And even after everything, I did not want to be the person who did that to her. But I wanted the trust violation enforced. I wanted the eviction notice served. I wanted Vance to sign a written acknowledgement of the withdrawals and agree to repayment, and I wanted it in writing, notarized, filed with the county. Hayes said that is a measured decision. I said I work in soil testing. I measure things for a living. It was not funny, but it was mine. Vance did not go quietly. I had not expected him to. A man who controls a homestead for 16 years does not give up the controls because someone hands him a letter. He finds a new lever. He builds a new wall. He tells a new story. His lawyer's name was Dunlap. Mr. Dunlap operated out of a strip mall office between a hardware store and a title company, and he filed a counterclaim within a week. The argument was adverse possession. Vance had lived on the acreage for 16 years, maintained it, paid property taxes on it, and therefore had a legal right to remain. The filing was 9 pages long, and used the word equitable 14 times. Hayes reviewed it in his office while I sat across from him. He took off his reading glasses and set them on the desk. Adverse possession does not apply to trust property. He said it is a settled point of law in the state. Mr. Dunlap either does not know that or does not care. Then why did he file it? Because Vance needed to feel like he was doing something. And because it buys time, a filing has to be reviewed, responded to, scheduled. It turns a 14-day clock into a 60-day process. Outside the courtroom, Vance had built a different kind of case. His post on the township group had gotten attention, and he followed it with a second one. This time, he described Helen as a corporate land developer who was targeting working families displaced by the storm. He attached a photo of the farmhouse with a tarp on the roof and a caption that said, "This is the homestead they want to take from us." Some neighbors believed it. Mr. Henderson next door shared the post. A woman I did not know commented, "This is what is wrong with this country." Another said, "Pray for this family." They were praying for Vance. They were praying for the man who had locked me out in a derecho and stolen my father's co-op payouts and borrowed against land he did not own. I sat in my apartment that night with my phone on the table and the notification light blinking like a small orange heartbeat. I did not open the app. I did not read the comments. I turned the phone face down and went to bed. Vance had always been good at building a story. He had built one about me for 16 years. Now he was building one for the whole county. The first time someone said it to my face was at the grocery store. Mrs. Harris had lived on County Road 4 for 20 years. She was in her late 60s, retired from the school district, and she had known my father. She stopped me in the cereal aisle with her cart blocking half the row and her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. "Alina," she said, and her tone was the tone people use when they are about to say something they believe is kind. "I heard what is happening with the acreage. Vance is a good man. He fixed my tractor twice. He helped me bale hay when the thresher broke. I think you should reconsider." I looked at her. I thought about saying everything. I thought about the FSA statements and the forged loan and the night I stood in the wind while Vance boarded up the windows. I thought about saying all of it right there between the Cheerios and the store brand granola. Instead, I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Harris." I put a box of cereal in my cart and walked to the register. In the car, I held the steering wheel with both hands and stared at the parking lot. A woman walked past with a toddler on her hip, and a man loaded bags into a truck, and the sun was out, and the world was normal, and I was the only person sitting in a parked car trying to remember how to breathe. My grandmother called that evening. I told her about Mrs. Harris. "What people say does not matter," Helen said. "What the county records say matters. I know that. Do you believe it? I am working on it." That night, Mrs. Gable called Gable Payne, the neighbor across the road, the one who had watched me standing on the porch, and called my grandmother. Her voice was steady and warm, and she did not start with small talk. "I saw everything that night, Alina," she said. "I saw them lock the door. I saw you standing on the gravel. I saw the wind getting worse. I called your grandmother because I did not know what else to do, and I have been waiting for someone to ask me about it." "Would you say that again?" I asked, in front of other people. In front of anyone who asks. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen of my apartment for a long time, and for the first time in weeks I felt something that was not anger or grief. It was something quieter. It was the feeling of not being alone. My mother came to the apartment on a Thursday. I did not know how she found the address. Later, I learned Vance had called the hospital and told them he was my emergency contact and needed to reach me urgently. And someone in the front office gave him the general area. And Clara drove around until she recognized my car in the lot. She stood at my door with her purse over one arm and her eyes red in the way they got when she had been crying, but had stopped before she arrived so she could look like she had it together. She had done that my entire life, crying before she got to where she was going, then arriving dry. "Can I come in?" she said. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the sofa and did not take off her jacket. I did not sit down. I leaned against the kitchen counter with my arms at my sides. "You do not understand," she said. "If Vance leaves, I have nothing. I do not have a job. I do not have savings. I do not have anywhere to go. I have not worked in 15 years. I have nothing. Alina, you have me." I said, "You have always had me. That is not, you chose not to take it every time. You chose Vance. He is my husband, and I am your daughter, and Dad was your husband first, and Vance took his money and his land and his daughter's bedroom, and you let him." She looked at the floor. Her hands were gripping the strap of her purse so hard the knuckles were white. "You are just like your father," she said. "Stubborn. You never bend." "Dad built that farm," I said. "Vance just painted over the windbreak." She stood up. She picked up her purse. She walked to the door and opened it and stepped into the hallway. She did not look back. She did not ask if I was all right. She walked down the hall and I listened to her footsteps until they faded into the stairwell. And then there was nothing. I closed the door. I locked it. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and cried for the first time since the night of the storm. I cried until I was empty, and then I stopped. And then I got up and washed my face and made dinner. The worst night was not the night of the Derecho. The worst night was 3 weeks later on a Tuesday, alone in the apartment with every light off and my phone face up on the nightstand, glowing with notifications I had promised myself I would not read. I read them. The comments on Vance's posts had multiplied. Someone had shared one of them to a regional community page, and people who had never met me and never met Vance were now offering opinions about a family they had constructed entirely from a photograph of a house with a tarp on the roof. A woman in a town 80 miles away called me an entitled brat. A man said my grandmother should be investigated for elder exploitation, which did not make sense, but had 43 reactions. Someone else said, "These kids today have no loyalty." I turned off the phone. I lay in the dark and listened to the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic on the highway overpass. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about saying, "Fine, I will drop it. You can have the house. You can have Vance. I will go." I picked up the phone. Then I opened the nightstand drawer. My father's brass auger key was there wrapped in the handkerchief my grandmother had embroidered with my initials. I unwrapped it and held it in my palm. It was heavier than I remembered, the way things from childhood always are. The metal was still worn. The ring still clicked when you turned it, and it was the only thing in that house that still belonged to me without Vance's permission. My father bought this key at an estate sale the week he closed on the acreage. My grandmother told me that once. He said he wanted something that lasted, something mechanical, something that kept working without being asked. I held it in the dark. Click, click, click. He had been dead for 16 years and the mechanism was still sound. It did not need anyone's permission. It did not need to explain itself. It did not need Vance to turn it or Clara to approve it or strangers on the internet to validate it. It just kept turning. I put the phone back on the nightstand. I did not call my mother. I lay there holding the key until my hand got warm and the quiet matched my heartbeat, and I fell asleep without deciding to. In the morning, I got up and went to work. I ran soil samples. I read moisture reports. I measured things. It was enough. I called my grandmother at 7 the next morning. She picked up on the first ring, which told me she had been waiting. "I am sorry I did not answer last night," I said. "You do not need to apologize for needing time. I know, but I am sorry anyway, and I am ready." Hayes's office at 8. My grandmother was already there, sitting in the client chair with her coat folded over the armrest and a cup of black coffee on the desk that she had brought from the hotel. Hayes had the folders open and a legal pad with handwritten notes in the margins. "We built the case the way you build anything that needs to last, one piece at a time." The title deed from the Palmer Family Trust dated 1998, naming Arthur Palmer as beneficiary. The trust amendment filed after my father's death, transferring the beneficiary designation to me, Alina Palmer. The life estate agreement signed by Clara Palmer Corley in 2002 with a conditional clause. The FSA and co-op statements showing $91,200 in unauthorized withdrawals. The loan application with Vance's false property affidavit, and the mismatched signature, and a sworn affidavit from Gable Payne, notarized the day before, stating that on the night of the Derecho, she had observed through her kitchen window as the front door of the farmhouse was locked from the inside, while Alina Palmer stood on the porch in the wind. Hayes prepared the final notice. 14 days to vacate, voluntary compliance. If Vance did not comply, the sheriff's office would execute the order. I also wrote a letter, not to Vance, to my mother. It was not a long letter. I did not ask for an apology. I did not explain my reasons. I wrote down the facts, the FSA and co-op withdrawals, the forged loan, the night of the storm, and I ended with one sentence. "I am not writing this so you will be sorry. I am writing this so you will know that I know." I mailed it on a Tuesday. Clara received it on a Thursday. Vance read it before she did because Vance read everything before she did. That was how it had always worked. What happened after was not something Vance had planned for. Vance drove to the hotel on a Friday afternoon. He had got the address from someone in the neighborhood, I never found out who. And he parked his truck in the loading zone and walked through the lobby without stopping at the front desk. He must have looked like a man with a purpose, because nobody questioned him until he was already pounding on the door of room 714. My grandmother opened it. She was wearing a gray cardigan and reading glasses, and she looked at Vance the way she looked at a contractor who had shown up without his estimate. "You have no right," Vance said. His voice was louder than I had ever heard it. Vance was a man who kept his volume low because he believed volume was weakness. But that was the old Vance, the Vance who believed he was in control. This Vance had read my letter and Hayes's notice on the same day, and the control was gone. "I lived on that acreage for 16 years, he said. "I fixed the roof. I replaced the well pump. I graded the driveway. I paid the property taxes. That land is mine." My grandmother stepped aside so he could see the room behind her. The desk, the folders, the yellow envelope she had carried in her raincoat the night of the storm. She reached into her pocket, the same pocket, and took out the envelope. She opened it. Inside was the original title deed, Arthur Palmer's name, the date of purchase, the stamp of the Palmer Family Trust. She held it out so Vance could read it. "You paid the property taxes," she said, her voice as steady as a load-bearing wall, "with money from my son's co-op dividends. You refinanced my property without authorization. And you locked my granddaughter outside during a 90-mile-per-hour wind event because she asked you where the payouts went." Vance looked at the deed. I was told later by my grandmother that the color left his face the way water leaves a sponge when you wring it. Slowly, then all at once. "You have 14 days, Helen said. "I will not refer the loan documents to the district attorney, but only if you leave." Vance turned around. He walked out of the room without closing the door. He did not drive home. He drove to the county courthouse and filed an emergency motion to block the eviction. It was the last move he had. The hearing was on a Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Courtroom B, Judge Harmon presiding. It was a small courtroom, the kind used for civil motions and property disputes, with wooden benches and fluorescent lights, and a clock on the wall that ticked the way all courthouse clocks tick. Like time is something that gets used up and does not come back. Vance sat at the respondent's table with Dunlap. He wore a button-down shirt I recognized, the one he wore to church on the 2 Sundays a year he attended. Clara sat behind him on the first bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking at a point on the floor somewhere between her shoes and the edge of the world. I sat at the petitioner's table with Hayes. I wore a blazer I had bought at a thrift store the week before, and the brass key on a short chain around my wrist, the way a woman wears a bracelet. The worn metal caught the light from the window. My grandmother sat in the second row behind me. She wore a dark coat and no jewelry. She did not need it. Hayes presented the trust documentation. He presented the life estate terms and the conditional clause. He presented the FSA and co-op withdrawal records. He presented the loan application with the false property affidavit and the mismatched signature. He presented Gable Payne's notarized affidavit. Dunlap argued adverse possession. Judge Harmon listened for 4 minutes and then raised one hand. "Mr. Dunlap," the judge said, "adverse possession does not apply to trust property in this state. Your client has no ownership claim. The trust documentation is clear. The life estate violation is documented, and the loan application raises questions I am not equipped to answer in this courtroom." The judge turned to Vance. "Mr. Corley, were you aware that this property was held in the Palmer Family Trust?" Vance swallowed. "My wife told me the land was ours. Your wife did not have the authority to convey that. The trust terms are unambiguous." The judge closed the file. "The emergency motion is denied. The eviction notice stands. I am also directing the clerk to forward the loan documentation to the district attorney's office for independent review." Vance sat still. Clara did not look up. Dunlap gathered his papers. The clock ticked. I stood behind me. My grandmother's eyes were on the key at my wrist. I turned and saw her face, and for the first time in the weeks I had known her again, her eyes were bright with something she did not try to hide. For 16 years, Vance had been the one who decided what happened on that acreage. The judge had just put the keys in someone else's hands. They moved out on a Saturday, 14 days after the hearing. A rented truck backed into the driveway at 8 in the morning, and Vance and Clara carried boxes to the tailgate in a rhythm that looked like they had practiced it. Maybe they had. Maybe they had been packing since the judge said the word denied, and the sound of it hit Vance's chest like a door closing from the inside. I stood on the roadside across the street. I did not go closer. I did not want to be on the land. The land was mine, legally, finally. But standing on it while they loaded the truck felt like the wrong kind of proximity, the kind that turns justice into spectacle. So I stood on the gravel shoulder with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched. The neighbors came out, not all of them, but enough. Mr. Henderson stood on his porch with a cup of coffee. A woman 2 doors down leaned against her mailbox. Mrs. Harris walked across the road to where I was standing. She was wearing a cardigan and sneakers, and she stopped beside me and did not say anything for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," she said. I did not know. I nodded. I did not say it was fine because it was not fine, but I nodded because she was there and that was something. Clara came out the front door carrying the last box. It was small, the kind you keep photos in, or letters, or things you do not want to lose in a move. She walked down the porch steps and she stopped when she was even with me. Vance was in the truck already, engine running, eyes straight ahead through the windshield. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were dry. Her face was drawn and tired. The face of a woman who has spent 3 decades making decisions that kept her safe and lost her everything else. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly, like it was something she had been holding in her mouth for weeks, and finally let go. Then she walked to the truck and got in and closed the door, and Vance pulled out of the driveway, and the rented truck turned off County Road 4 and they were gone. My grandmother came and stood beside me. She put her hand on my shoulder. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I bought the paint on a Sunday. Field red. I had to special order it because the farm supply store did not carry it in stock, and the man behind the counter said, "You sure about this?" "Most people go with white or barn gray." I told him I was sure. He mixed it and put the lid on and said, "It is going to look like clay and iron." I said, "That is the idea." I started painting at 9 o'clock in the morning. The windbreak was still gray, still Vance's gray. And as I rolled the red over it, each post changed like a page turning. The old color disappeared. The new color, the original color, my father's color, settled in. Gable came across the road with a pitcher of iced tea and 2 plastic cups. She sat on the porch step and watched me work. And between posts, she told me stories about my father. How he double-checked the soil pH. How he once spent 3 hours grading a single irrigation row because he could feel a half-inch drop that nobody else could see. How he cut his birthday cake every year with a pocket knife, because he said a pocket knife was the most honest tool a man could carry. He would have liked this color. She said he chose it. I said my grandmother called at noon. "Do you need anything?" "No, I have everything I need." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing the way you can hear someone smiling through the phone when the silence is the right kind. "A farm belongs to whoever keeps the soil standing," she said. My father's words, spoken in my grandmother's voice, carried across a phone line from a woman who had spent 14 years waiting for the chance to say them. I looked at the farmhouse. The windbreak was half red. The porch was swept. The window of the south barn, my father's addition, my old room, now mine again, was open, and the screen door moved in the breeze like it was breathing. The house was still standing, and so was I 6 months later. This is what had changed. Vance and Clara rented an apartment in a town 20 minutes east. Vance found work with a small fencing outfit that built cattle pens and equipment sheds. And from what Gable told me, he left the house every morning at 6:30 and came home at 5, and did not talk much to anyone on the road when he passed through on his way to the feed store. The district attorney's office reviewed the loan documentation. They did not prosecute. I had asked them not to, and my grandmother agreed, not out of mercy, but out of calculation. A trial would take months. The land was already ours. The money was being repaid under a notarized agreement. Vance would pay back the $91,200 over 7 years from his wages. Hayes would monitor every payment. My mother sent me a Thanksgiving card. No note inside, just her name. Clara. I put the card on the mantel beside a photograph of my father standing on the porch with a soil probe in his hand. I did not call her back. I was not ready. I did not know if I would ever be, but I kept the card. I worked at the extension lab. I paid into the trust. My grandmother had transferred the acreage to my name through a modified trust document, and I paid a small monthly amount that would eventually equal the original loan my father had taken. It was my grandmother's condition, and I agreed because it felt right to earn the land the way my father had earned it, one payment at a time. Helen came over every Sunday. She brought pecan pie from the bakery on Route 9, the same one she used to buy when I was a child. She sat on the porch and told me stories about parcels she had bought and sold, and consolidated and returned to yield. And sometimes she told me stories about my father, and those were the ones I kept the longest. Sunday evening. My grandmother had gone home an hour ago, and the pecan pie was in the kitchen wrapped in foil, and the porch light was on, and the road was quiet in the way country roads are quiet when the day is done, and people are inside, and the world is not asking anything of anyone. I sat on the porch with my father's brass auger key on the table beside me. The mechanism clicked in the dark. The metal was still worn. It had been worn since before I was born, and it would be worn long after I was gone, and the tool would keep turning regardless because that was what it was built to do. The windbreak was red again. I could see it in the porch light. The field red my father had chosen 28 years ago, the color that Vance had painted over and I had painted back. Beyond the fence, the road was dark and still. Mrs. Gable's kitchen lamp was on. Somewhere a tractor engine idled once and stopped. My grandmother did not demolish anything. She only took back what had always belonged to this family. The land, the truth. The girl who had been standing outside it. The windbreak was red again. The key held its shape. And the house, my father's house, was still standing. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight for something that was always yours? Or maybe you are still waiting for the right moment to stand up. Drop it in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening, I mean that.